Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 761 Heinous Villains. Only silence answered until a quiet buzzing broke it. Seth. Monique's voice asked through the communication orb. What's up? The wave of monsters suddenly stopped. Is this a new trap? She asked nervously. No. He was just dismayed because we just defeated his big toy. Finn joined the call. Since you mentioned it. I'm sure I can do something better with that, the blacksmith mumbled and walked up to the Colossus. Hey! Wait! Stop, don't touch it, the voice of the toad suddenly echoed. Haha, too late, with a wave of his hand he swiped the corpse of the Colossus. Yeah, too late. How about you send some more of those walkers? It was fun to punch them, Finn boasted. You heinous villains, the Maestro screamed before falling silent again. Seth looked a little perplexed. The Maestro sounded really squeamish. Weren't they supposed to be very frightening and powerful demons? When did they become so strong as to bully such a scheming villain? Was it okay to bully a scheming villain? It probably was. What will you do? Send more materials up? Seth asked excitedly. I have a better idea. If you are so confident in visiting the lower levels, I will just tell you where to find the entrances. Why should I waste my research subjects, if you are destined to die anyway? The voice suddenly answered, the voice oozing with bad intent. The black toad appeared again from a crack not too far away from them and spat out a scroll at their feet. It was almost as dark as the toad, and covered in mucus, but it was evidently a scroll of black hide. On it was a map of the canyon drawn in bright red ink. The moment Seth opened the scroll, the bright red drawings turned into a three-dimensional hologram, showing the caves and dungeons that led into the cave system below the canyon, or as the guild called it, the abyss. Wasn't this what you wanted? Now go away. Ha! Who's the heinous villain now? You were eavesdropping on us, Seth tried to provoke him, but nothing happened. What happened to the demon, suddenly not justifying his name of being, a pain in the ass? Fine, Monique, we are leaving. Let's gather up. The blacksmith finally spoke into the communication orb. If the demon was going to hole up, there was no luring him out anymore. If the Maestro didn't play along with them, he might run as the hive did. He also added Lydia to the call. We will pay a visit to the Dragon Newt territory next. Seth still held a grudge against them for the Naga dungeon, and he wanted to get some bodies for some of his own experiments. Dragon Newt golems sounded promising. Dragon Newt armors also sounded interesting. In his laboratory, the demon had already closed off all entrances to his domain. He was rubbing his hands as he brought out a thing that looked like a dead, rolled-up bug. Go and tell him that the people he was looking for have returned. After whispering to it, the device unfolded its legs like a real bug and jumped off the demon's bony hand to scuttle off through some crevice on the floor. It was actually a communication device to send a message. Let's whether you will even make it to the abyss, Payne mumbled as he watched the groups from Minas Mar leave his test site. Since it had not actually been that long since they set off, they had more than enough time to pay a visit to the Dragon Newt neighbors. They bordered with the Maestro's test site. With the Maestro being deterred, they just had to get through his territory before the antidote lost its effects. This problem was easily solved. The others simply entered Legion, while Seth sprinted ahead alone. It barely took him 30 minutes to charge straight through the demon's place and into the territory of the scaly scum. To his surprise, the land occupied by the descendants of dragons looked the most like normal land. Trees were swaying, grass was growing high. It looked almost idyllic. There were even fields with small huts. What the heck was their business, living a quaint life when they came as conquerors? As peaceful as it looked from afar, the moment they saw a human appear on the horizon, the mobs came running to attack. Seth's answer was summoning the others. Suddenly the 30 or 40 Dragon Newts ranging from level 80 to 90 faced the three field teams. The skirmish could hardly be called a fight. The tick-skinned attackers quickly became leather and materials and wandered into Seth's inventory. Their souls also were not spared. At least the ones that dropped. He wasn't going to take the experience away from his friends. We will split up here and take a dungeon each, deal? Seth suggested. Now that they had the demon's hologram map, they could also use it to find the rough locations of the dungeons the Dragon Newts had taken over. All of them were originally theirs and formed the border between the hive and the Dragon Newts. The moment Seth and Yulecat's Fur entered the dungeon they chose, the blacksmith noticed the theme. Like what the Naga dungeon had turned into, this was a volcanic cave with basalt walls and lava pools everywhere. The entrance was warm, but it became excruciatingly hot deeper in, making it hard to breathe. While the blacksmith had immunity to fire damage and felt rather comfortable as a kin of fire, the others had a harder time coping with the change in the environment. They were sweating profusely and were short of breath. It was finally Bulko's time to shine in a way that even surprised Seth a little. When they entered the hot caverns, the priest had suddenly equipped one of the relic-rated sets of elemental resistance Seth had made to test around. They had become relics after he tested around with enchanting them. When Bulko had heard about them, he had asked Seth whether he could have them. At the time the blacksmith had thought of giving them to the Fae or making golems with them. Although he didn't know at the time what the priest needed them for, it now became clear. Ding! Mirror Priest Bulko is sharing his stats with you. You are immune to fire. The buff can't be displayed. As a mirror priest, Bulko could share his stats with the party in the shape of support skills. Seth had not thought of this back then, but with the different sets of resistance, Bulko would be able to offset any kind of environmental debuff his party might receive in a dungeon or landscape. How much resistance does your skill carry over? Seth asked Bulko intrigued, while the party thanked the priest for the buff. I can grant 45% of my own resistance to the others. The fire armor's effects bring my basic fire resistance up to 65%, so the whole party will have roughly 30% resistance to fire damage, the priest explained readily. He was rightfully proud of his idea and being able to contribute to this kind of party. The bard could imagine that Bulko may have felt a little left out. He had not gained a blessing, nor was he chosen. Even when it came to legendary items, Seth had given him a helmet whose use was still not completely clear. All the while he had to look at the others flaunting their items and blessings. Being able to increase the party's basic resistance by 30% with a single skill was noteworthy, to say the least. He could see that the part giant was excited to be able to contribute in a significant way. Great work, let's go and test it, he patted Bulko on the shoulder and they proceeded deeper into the dungeon. Chapter 762 Magma Dungeons. Staying alert, the ordinary dragon newts were no problem for the party as they were barely better than the black walkers. It was mostly a higher defense. This dungeon had other dragon-themed beasts like drakes who posed a slightly bigger hurdle. The pools of lava here were filled with the equivalent of aquatic life but in molten stone. Giant toads and crocodiles that would charge out of the opaque glowing liquid or start spitting molten rock at them without warning. The dungeon may have been a lot harder without Bulko giving everyone an increase in fire resistance. And these were just the first 10 floors. Seeing this place, Seth quickly realized why the dragon newts didn't just overrun weaker territories. These lizards were much more specialized in defending by growing an advantageous environment and using it skillfully. However, these kinds of dungeons needed a lot of energy and or time to grow and be created. Taking over one dungeon at a time and turning it into this kind of fortress made a lot of sense. The only reason they suddenly attacked their neighbors and expanded their territory was probably because the Oathguard had already weakened them. This sudden push may also have something to do with the weaker dungeons creating a coalition to take over the wasteland the Hive left behind. As they proceeded through the dungeon, Seth kept the role of tank and didn't directly kill any of the newts himself. He still got the same amount of experience as the others but his Dragon Slayer title had less chance to grow, which was what he wanted. The boss of the 10th floor was a Dragon Newt warrior at level 90. Although his level was not much higher, as a boss his stats were inflated to the max. Its stats were quite high with almost 500 in attributes like strength, endurance, and agility. In its hands, it held a crude, sturdy spear and shield. Leave this one to me. I want to try fighting it one-on-one, Mike suddenly asked to have a duel with the boss. Looking at Mike using the Thaia's discerning eyes, Seth had to admit that the cat man was not far behind the lizard boy. His ordinary attributes were between 200 and 300 with his main attributes being above 400. He had gained a lot of additional stats thanks to the blessing of violence. Mike was still using the items the blacksmith had made with the help of Puffles. Since he was able to reinforce and strengthen items like the Frozen Sky Brigandine and Flaming Fury with his master mark, they were not too far behind in basic stats, which was why Seth didn't insist on making something new for him, other than the helmet. Since they were relics, they always had a chance to become legendary in the future. The beastman charged forward. He aligned his head with his spine suddenly becoming 3 times as fast. It didn't end there as a thin layer of ice formed under his boots and further increased his speed. The ice glider boots were the only item Seth had given a makeover. The blacksmith added legendary Olympian silver to the epic leather boots and refined and strengthened the ice troll souls previously used with the soul refinery. The last point, he did for all the items. With the boost on the ice, Mike shot toward the dragon newt warrior like a bullet. The boss was not stupid and quickly reacted by lifting his shield to block the beastman half his size. Well, that was stupid. You should have dodged. Seth thought to himself as the scene played out before him. The ram-horned Mike charging forward with terrible speed collided with the shield, which proceeded to disintegrate upon touch. The metal it was forged of was pulverized upon contact and the charging ram passed right through, turning the dragon newt's scaly chest into a mangled mess. The boss was catapulted back, his corpse barely staying in one piece after facing the full force of the swordsman's charge. Yeah, right, swordsman. Awkwardly Mike came to a halt after the boss was smashed into the opposite wall of the boss room, sacking to the ground in a bloody pulp. Mike, you should hold back. You are supposed to be a swordsman, you know. Mina cruelly voiced what Seth only thought. How am I going to get any materials out of that minced meat? Really now, Mike? Seth joked. I just wanted to try out a new opener. It's not my fault he tried to block the ram charge. Mike defended himself with a chuckle. It was just good-natured banter. After the first boss was defeated with an anticlimactic headbutt, they continued going deeper into the cave system. The lava pools grew to lakes in the floors further down and there were only narrow bridges of solid rock to walk on. Even with Seth's life detection, these environments were not easy to face. Although everyone had gotten a buff in fire resistance, it didn't mean they could shrug off being sprayed with liquid rock and even falling into the lava lakes. The only ones able to survive would have been Seth and Bulko. This was arguably harder than simply facing a bunch of strong monsters, but the added challenge was also what spiced things up and helped them improve. Although Seth was able to protect everyone thanks to Apollo's shield, with only that they were just sitting ducks. Mike, for example, could not rely on his sword's elemental properties, since most creatures on these floors were immune to fire. Similarly, Finn could not just punch them and Mina had a hard time using her shadow magic since the brightness of the lava didn't allow for many shadows. Finn, can't you turn into one of those things and hunt them in their element? Bulko asked the fairy. Yes. Of course. Finn definitely could do that, but Finn doesn't want to, the fairy stuttered flustered. It's okay if you can't do it, Finn shapeshifting can't be easy, Seth supported her. Right, it isn't. Finn is sorry, Finn can't turn into things she didn't practice. Bulko, I lied. I'm sorry, she apologized depressed. It's okay. I just thought it might be possible. It was Bulko's turn to be flustered. After some trial and error, it was Lix's time to shine. Since she was an elven elementalist she was able to use the magic of all elements. Although attacks of other elements were weakened in this environment dominated by fire and earth, she was able to grow their foothold thanks to her mastery of earth and fire elements. With more room to work with, Mina found a new use for a skill that had been severely underused by her before, telekinesis. Together they came up with a new discipline, called fairy fishing. Using the skill bound to the ring of Nyx and Seth's directions using life detection they started a session of telekinetic fishing. Finn, as the only one of them that could fly, was the bait, flying above the surface of the magma like a fly. Seth's role was to tell her where to fly around. When one of the monsters surfaced to attack Finn, the fair would lure it closer for Mina to catch it with telekinesis. Once the cat girl hauled the beasts on land, out of the lava, the rest of the party could proceed to curb stomp the mobs. With this strategy they worked their way through the dungeon, only interrupted by a boss room every 10 floors. They took turns to solo the bosses, taking care not to damage the materials like Mike did the first time. Ice glider boots, new. Legendary. Physical.def, 700. Mag.def 650. Durability, 4500. 1 Blessing of Wind. 2 plus 200% power on skills and spells. 3 plus 20% health regeneration. 4 45% less damage from frost-related attacks. 5 plus 20% overall power up under the open sky. 6 plus 15% speed in the cold and on ice. 7 active skill, Ice Glider. A pair of smooth leather boots reinforced with legendary materials. An original work by Master Smith in cooperation with a divine being, that was overhauled by Master Smith, the first Master Blacksmith and Master Enchanter of Earth. Superior materials and mysterious practices were used in the making of this item. Thanks to the high craftsmanship they grant 15% additional movement speed. Chapter 763 Toenail Club. Please wait. Mercy. Dragon Newt Chief Leave 99. Everyone looked stumped at the final boss, who greeted them with a plea for mercy. If you kill me I will lose a whole 2 levels. I will give you anything if you spare me. He had a big pompous throne in the back but was kneeling right in front of the door to the boss room, begging them to spare his life. Since everyone looked at him to answer, Seth stepped forward to make a decision. He was not a cruel person, he was someone that could be talked to. Was it hard for Dragon Newts to reach such a high level? Well, it wasn't easy for any of them either to gain a level past 90. The bard thought of at least giving him the chance to buy his life. What are you offering? It shouldn't be something that the dungeon would give, or you drop if we kill you, right? Oh, merciful mister. I would not dare to even think of cheating you, he exclaimed. Seth felt awkward, being called mister by a 3-meter-tall dragon person that looked like the grandfather of the other dungeon inhabitant, with a beard of tassels around his chin. While the blacksmith tried to decide how exactly he thought about that, the chief started bringing out stuff from his inventory. This is a necklace made of the teeth of the previous chiefs of my tribe. This is a weapon made from one of my great ancestors' wing nails. This toga was created by our great ancestor and still carries his aura. This is the core of a salamander a great chieftain of the past slew. This. With every item he brought out, he looked up to Seth in desperation to see whether the man that decided over his life was pleased or not. The blacksmith deliberately showed no reaction to the relic-rated and epic items the chief brought out. Seth kept silently watching, as the sweat started pouring from the forehead of the boss. As his inventory kept growing lighter, true desperation became visible on his face. This is my club made from the toenail of our ancestor. ERM, this is a chunk of metal anyone in our tribe was unable to process? My inventory is empty, please take all of this and spare me. He finally broke down and simply kowtowed to him. It seemed like the last 2 were really ones he had wanted to hold onto, and Seth immediately understood why. Although crude in workmanship, the club was rated legendary. Same for the chunk of metal. Essence of Kova, crafting material. Special. The coagulated blood of Kova. The item description was overwhelmingly underwhelming. Seth had no idea who Kova was. The only thing he could conclude was that Kova was a god of some sort since this was a special rated metal. He would have to ask Lena, maybe she knew who or what Kova was. It was definitely enough to pay for the life of the boss. Alright, this is enough to spare you. Of course, we also take everything the core can spit out. Of course, the dragon newt quickly ran over to the core to get the treasure chest. Is it really okay to leave just like that? Mike whispered a little grossed out from watching the boss behavior. One boss wouldn't do too much for our experience, and he already paid his ransom. Let's be nice and let him live, the blacksmith said magnanimously. Yes, please don't kill poor old party snacks, the giant boss joined in as he returned with the treasure chest. Here, I will even open you the return formation. Please, leave in peace and prosperity, dear lords and ladies. He kept becoming even more obnoxiously submissive. Yeah, we are leaving. Good luck reaching Leave 100, Seth said after packing up all the stuff Party Snacks, which seemed to be his actual name, had brought out. Now Seth had another 2 legendary materials to make something from. One was the essence of Kova, the other was, Lesser Fire Dragon's toenail. It was part of the crude club, if Seth disassembled the weapon he would get the toenail, really why was it called toenail and not claw? There was also the salamander core. A salamander was a powerful fire spirit. Seth's gloves he received from Tord were made from the leather of such a being. It was a shame the core he received was only epic rated. The other things were not up to standard for the lords and field teams of Minas Mar, but they would wander into the guild vault. Previously, members of the Oath Guard had the privilege to be able to purchase better items for their private loadout. With Minas Mar's expansion as a district and taking in subsidiary guilds, this system was also expanded. It had been Jane's idea to introduce a contribution system. Any member associated with Minas Mar could gain contribution points and get the chance to purchase items from the public guild vault. Simply said, it was a way to distribute items they would not want to sell to random people among their own. The money and contribution needed would deter people from trying to make a quick buck. Having stepped through the teleport formation without a problem, they were back on the vibrant surface. Was that really a good idea? We don't know what happens when he reaches Leave 100. Wouldn't it have been better to strike him down now? Lixis voiced her doubts. Seth shrugged. Isn't that the best part? If he does nothing, we just got a bunch of good stuff. If this is all a ploy to gain time and come for revenge later, it's a heap of materials and experience delivering itself to us. I really see no drawback. If you phrase it like that. Lixis answered stunned. It's a win-win situation for us, Mike agreed. They contacted the other teams, who were not as lucky to meet such a supportive final boss. They used the chance to camp out in the idyllic territory of dragon people. They didn't have to wait for long before the other teams joined them again. How did it go? Lydia jumped at Mike the moment her team arrived and asked in the round. Our boss was very accommodating, Mike said startled. I can see Monique already. Let's talk when everyone is here, Seth suggested. And he started emptying his inventory for us. Finn described excitedly. Are you serious? The members of the other two teams were stumped. Yeah, he even handed me 2 legendary materials, Seth confirmed the colorful descriptions of the fairy. Although there were not as many epic beatdowns as she mentioned, it was a roughly accurate rendition of their dungeon trip. What now? Do we camp out and then go to one of those entrances? Monique finally asked later on, referring to the map they had gotten from Pain India's. Nope. We camp out and then we go to an entrance my golem drones found. Seth revealed that the drones also had success while they were on an outing. Although he had not found as many entrances as there were on the demon's card, there were 2 not mentioned on the map. I doubt the Maestro would give us something useful, I bet most of them have some kind of trap or ambush he thinks we can't deal with. At least the ones the drones already checked seemed untrustworthy. Evading those on the map might be our best bet. They talked for a while longer, ate dinner, and finally went to sleep. Chapter 764 Splitting Up. So far, it's just a normal cave. Seth had no experience as a cave explorer, but it reminded him of the time when he would go hiking with his parents in the past. It was a bittersweet memory he had buried so long ago, he thought it forgotten. Now he was here with his friends and significant others. His assessment was purely based on cave exploration videos he saw on the internet and documentaries he saw on TV. The cave was narrow in some places and very wide in others while winding deeper and deeper into the earth. At least it wasn't dark, although it was tight in most places. Thanks to the various night vision items everyone had, they were able to enjoy the view. What are you talking about? It's just a bunch of rocks. Lydia complained. What do you mean? Look at that column. It must have taken millennia to grow. It looks so soft and goopy and tasty, but it's really hard rock. Finn started swooning in an uncharacteristic fit of enthusiasm. I wonder why this place didn't turn into a dungeon, Mike mumbled as they squeezed through a tight space in the wall. Not the right conditions. It's too narrow and too far from any energy routes. This way it became like an expressway down to the abyss. A shaft directly down to hell. What is the abyss like? Did you see anything from the golems? Monique asked curiously. From what I know, it's supposed to be a huge system of caves and huge caverns creating a wide dark reach below. We talked a little about the wide system of caves here in school, but it probably changed a lot with the dungeons growing wantonly. Do you think the guys down here are really a lot stronger than those on the surface? Finn mused. Seth could only shrug. He knew what the Adventurer Guild theorized. They thought it could be that the mana density in this place was a lot higher since it was closer to the actual dragon veins and the caves had ample space to grow dungeons. Not only could dungeons and monsters grow quicker in this environment, it would also spark great competition between the strongest beasts and their minions. This meant not only were the things down here strong, but they would also have a lot of practical experience fighting, making them hard opponents. So everyone has to be careful. I doubt it will be as relaxed as our visit to the Maestro, or the Dragon Newts. Since those guys are probably the losers who had to leave here, Seth cautioned. Wow, is it this place? Jess exclaimed as the tunnel they were going through was widening, leading into a cavern dimly lit by fluorescent stuff above. This should be it, Seth said with a nod. They had been descending for several hours when they finally reached the entrance to the abyss, the underground world that reached far and wide right below the canyon above. Wow, it's crazy how something like this can exist below these mountains, Tecker said in awe. Using night vision to look at the otherwise dim cave, made it look like its own world with an exotic bluish-green sky. The high ceiling was held by almost organic-looking structures of columns, that looked almost disconcerting the further away they were. They could also see the entrances to other tunnels and caverns in the distance along the walls. It's rather empty, James commented after a moment. Now that he mentioned it, he was right. They expected the place to be teeming with creatures, but all that greeted them was silence. The droning of silence even. Everything here probably has its own dungeons and territories. They can't be at constant war with each other, Doha gave his semi-professional opinion as someone who had seen many dungeons in his past. Okay, let's go with that, then whose territory is this? Mike asked back. Mine. Everyone turned to the sudden voice that sounded from behind them, but there was nothing there. Only a bard laughing out loud behind them. Seth changed his voice and used voiced projection to use the perfect timing to drop a cliché line. You mean it? Finn squealed. Finn was so up for a fight, she started hitting him with her tiny fists. Calm down, calm down. I'm sorry, okay, he apologized hurriedly. I already checked the place with Aya's discerning eyes. There is nothing dangerous here. If anything, it's probably empty because the mana concentration is still really low here, compared to other places in the abyss. Now that he mentioned it, the casters among the friends realized that although the mana density had risen, it was nothing to write home about. Compared to what it was like in many places on the surface, this was just average, probably the reason people rather went to the surface than settle at the edge of the abyss. Should we stay together or do we split up? Monique asked sassily. You are all grown-up people, I think each field team can go on their own. Just remember to run away or cry for help if you get in a sticky situation. Ha! As if. Monique joked. Each team had at least one chosen among them. Seth also doubted they would have any great problems unless they ran into an existence like Python, or Wolfram, or Puffles for that matter. This meant Seth didn't have to babysit them. Then I will go my own way with the Tatzel and Puffles. Seth shrugged. You aren't coming with us? Mina asked a little sad with droopy ears. If you guys want to grow, I'm only in your way. I'm leaving for your sake. So make sure to really kick their asses. I will. Me, too. Finn joined in. Alright then, everyone chooses a tunnel. Good luck and have fun, Seth ended their little private scene and sent the teams on their way. So it's back to just us. Well, it's not like you would need anyone besides the great me. I'm also here, Tatzel intruded. Right, Seth still was far from alone. Puffles and Tatzel were still with him. Albeit. Well, Puffles, you will have to sit this one out. You are way too strong. This one is a situation where Tatzel and I will suffice. Haha, we will see about this. I will look forward to you begging me to help. Seth brought out Tatzel, who was now big enough to look him in the eyes. Although the emoji was barely leave 60, the blacksmith had no reason to doubt its strength. He was a genius in magic. The blacksmith could take over the vanguard and the emoji would rapidly fire spells from behind. What way should we go? He asked the big black snakelet beside him. He left the decision to him. Tatzel sniffed a little in the air. That way. I can smell the strongest magic from that place. Chapter 765 Golden Goose? This place is massive. Lydia mumbled as they entered the first dungeon they found on the route they chose. It was incredibly dark. They would have had a hard time seeing what was going on if they didn't each have a kind of night or dark vision. Unlike the gate they used to enter, the hallway behind made them feel like ants. Compared to the dungeon, the gate was like the hole of a mouse in the wall. What appeared before them was reminiscent of a hallway in an ancient castle, lined with columns as high as high-risers and just as thick. The floor tiles were bigger than the size of a tennis court. It was just a hallway, but it wasn't hard to believe it would have its own microclimate. What is this? A castle for giants! James exclaimed. Maybe we should start looking for the golden harp and the goose that lays golden eggs. Jess joked. I don't get that. How would you know that they have a golden harp? Azul asked confused. On all my travels, I never came across something like a goose that lays golden eggs. There are some legends of birds laying golden eggs, some types of rocks, griffins and phoenixes, but a goose. Dohu also couldn't quite follow the joke. It references an old fairy tale. It's about a boy who finds a castle of giants in the clouds and steals their treasures after they try to eat him. Ferdinand, Team 3's healer explained readily. Oh, I see, the chimer answered surprised. The people of Earth are very imaginative. A goose that lays golden eggs, the tigerman said, shaking his head amused. Still stuck to the golden goose, ignoring the talk of a castle in the clouds. Look out for the gaps, they are pretty wide, Lydia called their attention back to the situation at hand. The gaps between the massive tiles were big enough to fall into. If they were not careful, it was possible to lose their step. What monsters do you think this place holds? Phaenis asked vigilantly. You guys should look up, I think the first enemies will be giant insects, Archibald, the archer, pointed out to them. Looking at the ceiling, they saw massive spider webs and big fat Leave 92 spiders sitting in their midst. They looked no weaker than the creatures the hive threw at them as their elites. Insects again! Jess cried out, exasperated. It had already been a burden on her mind to fight the hive, she had more than enough of facing giant invertebrates. They suddenly heard a cracking and slicing from behind, followed by a notification. Ding! You killed giant cockroach Leave 89. Experience gained. Everyone turned around, seeing Dohu with a disgusting yellowish liquid dripping from his axe. The tiger stood above the corpse of a roach the size of a tower shield, he had hacked in two. Be careful, this thing slipped just out from the gap behind us. He warned everyone. Oh, heck no. I'm out. I'm not gonna stay in this place and fight giant roaches. Jess proclaimed squeamishly. Calm down, Jess. It's okay. I'm not letting them touch you. James calmed her confidently, lifting the shield of Cerberus. Ugh, I know, but still. Can't we just look for a different dungeon instead? No, we can't. Lydia shot her down. Look at this place. This is just the first floor and the mobs are already in the early level 90s. It's exactly what we have been looking for. I doubt we will quickly find something better fit for our level range, Lydia explained her decision. Jess could only nod unwillingly. Don't worry. You don't have to fight the roaches. You, Azul, and Archer will aim for the spiders above. The vanguard will make sure nothing that comes out of those gaps will surprise us. Lydia gave her orders. She, Dohu, James, and Phaenis faced the four sides while Jess and James started casting. Archer immediately started firing. Unlike Lydia, who was chosen by WebNovel, a god with several aspects, Archer was chosen by Setet, which made him a divine archer. He had gained some AoE attacks, but his skill set was more focused on single powerful shots across a far distance. He was a sniper, so this was right up his alley. Using one of the core skills as a chosen, he summoned the weapon of his divine sugar daddy. Right, unlike Lydia, who got materials, he directly got a skill to summon his own weapon. Not only were his arrows now imbued with the powers of Mabel, they were also imbued with some non-specific divine power that increased damage against undead, dark, cursed, and demonic beings. The power also increased the speed of his arrows and could make them really flashy. As the only ranged member who didn't have to cast, his arrows instantly started shooting toward the spiders in the nets above them. It quickly showed that the spiders were just waiting for them to come closer. The moment they started taking damage, they started to rope down to fight them on the ground. Taking into account the darkness inside the dungeons, it would have been a horrible experience if they had not known of them. Walking through a wide hall of stone, not being able to see anything. Constantly being harassed by giant insects coming from the gaps in the floors and then being suddenly surprise attacked by an unknown number of giant spiders from above. It just showed how important it was to be able to deal with darkness first and foremost. This way, the situation had completely changed. While they could directly slay the creatures from the gaps, the spiders were just targets. Even if they started coming down now, they were helpless against the lightning and arrows. The biggest frick you to this whole dungeon strategy was Jess. She was already nervous and pissed, so there was nothing holding her back. With the torch of Hecate, her fire magic was not just tremendously strengthened. She also had double cast, like Seth, and could imbue the curse attribute into her magic thanks to Seth's demonic enchantments. There was no escaping her storm of fireballs. The nets above went up in flames like tinder. The spiders were first cooked in a sea of demonic fire before the floor under their feet was literally burned away and they took the over 100m dive to the ground. If they were still alive after that, the party did them a favor by ending their life. In the meantime, Dohu, Lydia, James, and Phaenis guarded the four directions. 2 of them were chosen ones and all 4 of them had legendary items. The insect around level 90 died the moment they showed their faces, except Win. Why didn't you kill it yet? Lydia asked Phaenis, looking at the massive centipede squirming on the ground. It had no outward injury, but it was probably caught in an illusion of fear the chosen of Phobos had cast on it. I feel a little bad killing it, since it looks like Puffles, don't you think so? They could be distant relatives, she mumbled embarrassed. You better hope Puffles never hears of this. Otherwise, I might have a team member less in the future. Put away those stupid thoughts and end its suffering already. Phaenis bumbled for a moment longer, shrugged, and sliced the centipede apart with her marvelous, magnificent, mad Yatagon mim. Her powers as a chosen and the cruel notions of the weapon perfectly complemented each other. The party kept working their way down the hallway. For a long while there were no doors branching off until the hallway finally came to a crossing. There was a massive door to the left, a massive door to the right, and a flight of stairs in the front which they could either follow up or down. It was not just a giant dungeon, the floors were also not in a specific order. Where are we going? Down, up, or do we stay on this floor? Lydia asked the team. Chapter 766 Air Marshal. Do you think anything will change if we go through the doors? They had all reached Leave 91 some time ago, but the experience gain just became more abysmal. They might just have slaughtered several hundreds of beasts in their level range, but it was like a drop on a hot stone. The difference in the experience bar was barely visible. There were a lot of monsters, but their levels were unsatisfactory. Not to mention that they did not really pose a challenge. If nothing changed behind those doors, it was better to go up or down, hoping another floor would bring stronger monsters. Maybe we should check the doors and then go up the stairs. Phaenis suggested. Why up the stairs? Ferdinand asked, looking dreadfully at the massive stairs. Climbing up would be torture. I thought while we are still fresh and fit, we should use our energy to go up and set up a camp. I wouldn't want to go down first and then have to climb the full stairway again, later on. I guess, that makes sense. Ferdinand accepted the reasoning. Duho had also been nodding at the side. Lydia also agreed with that reasoning. But before they climbed any stairs, they decided to check the giant doors. It was fortunate they didn't have to try and open those doors, they were so big, the party could walk through a slit under the door. Shortly after they entered the left door they had to climb atop a mount of earth, that covered the floor as the eyes could see. In the far distance, they saw mountains of rotten wood, probably what was left of furniture that had once existed. Just what kind of dungeon had they walked into? Do you think this earth here was a carpet in the past? Duho mumbled as he split a Leave 93 earth worn the size of a sewer pipe. Now that you mention it, that sounds plausible. James agreed with him. After a while, they returned to the door. Although the creatures they met here had a slightly higher level, they were also much more sparse. Walking around that huge room and looking for these monsters was not worth their time. It was similar for the rooms across the hallway. Let's climb up this staircase and make a camp on landing over there, Lydia suggested. The plan was to stay on the landing they could see from their current position and rest there before climbing the other half of the staircase to take a look at the next floor after the rest. This is actually quite refreshing. Monique was standing on a wide plain covered in swaying grass. They had entered a portal-type dungeon, which brought them to this quaint and scenic landscape. A nice warm wind was blowing and everything was peaceful. I feel it's somewhat uncharacteristic for a dungeon to be this quiet, Jonah mumbled under his mask. Although the vampiric swordsman held a little grudge, he was also audibly relieved about being able to speak without having to lift his mask all the time. Even though he struggled to decide which he disliked more, the mask or his own face, he had to admit that this mask was even better than his previous one and it really complemented the powers he was given by Munera, the goddess of cruel beauty. You are right, it's a little too quiet. Tekker, can we have a shield? Just to be on the safe side. Monique asked their tank. Sure, the massive man's tinny voice echoed from the helmet of his thick armor. He smashed his giant shield onto the ground and a big bubble encased the whole party instantly. It was one of his skills as the Bastion, his secondary class. Tekker was not a chosen, but he had gained the blessings of Alexiares and Anicetus, which matched his classes in an almost disturbing manner. Tekker's classes were the Keep and the Bastion, while the monikers of the two gods were the Unconquerable One and He Who Wards Off War. The synergy of their blessings and Tekker's classes gave him a defensive capability even the blacksmith praised. Enveloped in Tekker's shield they kept going on. They didn't really have a direction and simply kept wandering across the grassy plain. After a while Tekker spoke up. Hold on a moment. I think something has been constantly chipping away at my shield. I believe something has been constantly attacking us since we came in, the tank postulated his theory. Shit. Let me have a look at your armors, guys, Allison suddenly exclaimed. As the only one among them with an appraisal skill for items, she started checking everyone's equipment. It's as I thought. The durability of all our items has fallen since we entered this dungeon. I believe Tekker is right. Something did attack us all this time unnoticed, but our equipment took the brunt of the damage. She explained that most of their items' durability had fallen by almost a third before Tekker cast his shield. Suddenly a wind blade shot toward Allison's head but was instantly blocked by Tekker's shield. The shield flickered a little but was undamaged otherwise. Tisk, so you found out. Why couldn't you just silently die like all the others before you? What are you doing? It has no sense hiding any longer. The standard tactic won't work. Taking shape from the very air surrounding them, humanoid figures appeared surrounding them. They wore billowing robes and incorporeal armor. They had humanoid faces, but no definite features. They were hazy blue shapes, barely visible in contrast to their surroundings. I guess you guys are the mobs of this dungeon. Monique commented on their appearance, readying her spear. Your stubbornness will only lead to a violent death. Becoming dust in the wind would have been mercy, the tallest of them stated. He also wielded a translucent spear. Air Marshal LV.92, Elite. The mob talking seriously was met by a bunch of snorting and grunting from Team 1 of Mina's March. All of them were slightly amused by the creature's sudden jokes. What are you laughing about? The Marshal barked, aggravated. You. Who else is there? Shay answered him readily. I have to agree. Your threat is quite amusing. Ray agreed with his colleague. Hubris, was his last word before lifting his spear to attack. Despite looking like it was made of air, the spear smashed into Tekker's barrier with incredible force that shook the plane. The leader's attack was also the signal for the others to attack. With all mobs attacking simultaneously, the shield finally showed a semblance of weakening. These guys are a little strong, you guys should get ready. The shield will break soon, Tekker prompted them to get in formation. It was a classic formation with Tekker, Monique, and Jonah in the front, while the casters Ray, Shay, and Allison were the rear guard. The towering knight stepped forward and cast another skill that shared his massive defense with the others, before ramming his shield into the ground and entrenching himself. He pointed his pipe at the group of elite mobs and used Cry of Eris to absorb and double the aggro of the weird elementals. If I had a face like yours, I would sue my parents. I envy the people that don't know you, he shouted at them with pathos in his voice. Seth had made him learn a whole bunch of fighting words for the Cry of Eris. When the shield finally broke, all the airheads charged toward Tekker, who had already become a true bastion. Chapter 767. A haze. Monique's spear flashed past the translucent figure, making absolutely no damage. It was the same for Jonah's first attacks. Physical attacks did not affect these phantoms. Only Shay's water magic, Ray's curses, and Allison's fire magic dealt visible damage. You have to use attributed attacks. Allison called out from behind, but the two vanguards were already far ahead of her. Monique's spear was covered in divine silver aura, while Jonah was fighting in a storm of blood. The vampiric swordsman had spent the last weeks when they were waiting for Evie's message with training. Jonah worked on fusing his blood arts with the powers he gained as Munera's apostle. The result were ritualistic sword dances that reminded of rhythmic gymnastics. Fast and elegant sword moves with an enrapturing, almost hypnotic effect. Razor-sharp ribbons of blood painted quick traces of death into the air. As much as Jonah complained about his own perceptions of the skills, they were scarily effective in almost any enemy. Despite being mesmerized and stunned by the sword dance, Jonah's attack still could not deal any great damage. Monique was in a similar peril. Her spear was covered in Athena's divine power, but the attributes of the goddess mostly improved Monique's physical damage and had little elemental or magical attributes. Since the divine power itself had no great effect on the phantoms, it was also proven that they were not undead. Still, Jonah was better off than her. Thanks to the mental status effects and his vampiric power, he was able to keep the air people at bay when Tekker lost their aggro. Monique on the other hand was mostly ignored, despite her efforts. Suddenly, she heard a bunch of notifications, and her spear was also enveloped in an aura of flames. Ding! Party member Ray had enchanted your weapon with tribal fire. You will deal 20% additional fire damage for 20 minutes. Ding! Party member Ray had enchanted your weapon with the Curse of Shax. Your attacks have a 35% chance to inflict the target with blindness, deafness, or confusion. Ding! Party member Ray had enchanted your weapon with Melano's Dark Gift. Your attacks have a 55% chance to inflict the target with madness or nightmares. Thank you, Ray, she exclaimed, as she immediately started distributing curses on the distracted phantoms. The tribal fire finally gave her a good way to deal damage, while the slew of status effects opened a way for her to attack. Still, it became clear that not only the difficulty in the abyss was a lot higher, they also had a bad compatibility with this dungeon. Maybe it was them, who had laughed too early. While the 3 vanguards barely had the chance to reap any kills, the 3 rearguards were also not as successful as they hoped. The elemental creatures also had no particular weakness to magic. The only thing effective was the fire magic Allison was able to cast, but it was not enough for a great effect. Although Tekker kept taking the aggro and they layered various crowd control effects on them, the creatures only died slowly, one by one. Ugh! Retreat! Retreat! We have to report to the commander, the leader's voice clearly cut through the air. It was like a support buff, helping the other get out of the effect of control skills. When they finally started dying off, the leader somehow came back to his mind, and ordered his people to retreat, when most of them were only holding on by a small thread. One by one, they started fleeing when the crowd control effects wore off. They kept firing at the fleeing creatures, but once they were on the run, the party only managed to finish a few of them off before they turned invisible in addition to being intangible. Arg! Monique exclaimed, ramming the ground with the butt of her spear. How annoying! How can there be such annoying creatures? It was quite obvious how frustrated she was. None of her teammates was any less aggravated about how the fight went. Although they were in no danger thanks to Tekker, being almost unable to put a dent in your opponent, was this what it felt like to fight Seth? Calm down, everyone. Look at your experience bars. Allison was the voice of reason that called everyone's attention to their status screens. Their eyes widened when they saw their experience bars. Although they had only beaten a bunch of them before they started running away, the experience gained was visible. The maybe 25 creatures they killed had given them as much experience as 200 beasts on the surface. As aggravating as it was to fight these things, the experience gained was tremendous, almost 10 times greater than anywhere else. I guess this means we are going to stay here, Jonah commented, slightly more motivated to keep fighting. Before we run after them, we have to come up with a better strategy. Although it helped when Ray enchanted my weapon, we are taking too long to take them down. Allison is currently the only one among us that can deal proper damage to them. Well, sorry, but don't expect too much from me. I asked Seth for a ring to improve my alchemy, not my fighting power. The wizard shrugged her shoulders. Despite not having a piece of offensive legendary equipment, Allison was able to hold her ground alongside others like Lixus or Jess, since her title as a bookworm allowed her to strengthen her magic based on the knowledge she accumulated. I guess the time has finally come to roid up, she suddenly asked, pulling out rows and rows of test tubes with colorful liquids and potions. The crazy smile that suddenly crept on her otherwise expressionless face, made her really look like a mad scientist. Cough cough cough. Their lungs burned the moment they entered the dungeon. The dungeon was a world of twilight with a thin haze that burned when breathing in, hanging over everything. The dungeons gave the impression of a dead forest. Pillars that may have been massive trees at one time, were covered in mushrooms, making the whole dungeon look like a land-based coral reef. Is this poison? Mina asked, coughing, as she noticed her HP slowly draining. Cleanse. Recovery. Share endurance. Volko cast and a warm holy light enveloped them. They felt better for the moment, but breathing was still uncomfortable. Finn also tried to cast antidote on everyone, but it was not effective. It's not poison. I guess this haze are the spores of these fungi. All I can do is improve your health regeneration and basic defense by sharing my endurance with you, the priest theorized. They had stayed long enough on Earth, to have absorbed some of its advanced knowledge. If magic did not recognize these spores as poison, this meant they were real spores. Tiny seeds of mushrooms that actually attacked their lungs from inside. We have no gas masks or any of the like. I guess the best we can do is cover our mouths with a cloth or something. Mike suggested. They had just entered, not even meeting any monsters yet, and already had a bad time with the mere terrain. They all placed a wet cloth above their mouths, which kind of helped deal with the spores. Everyone okay? Then let's go inside for real, Mike said, and took the lead with his armored dreadwolf pet. Thanks to Evan's thorough care, it had recently evolved, gaining the strength to play the role of their tank. The party followed the two, into the twilight of the Mushroom Kingdom. Chapter 768 Mushroom Reef. They had only made several steps into the dungeon when they faced their first enemy. They didn't suddenly appear from around the corner, out from the shadows above them, but they literally broke out from the coral-like mushrooms that surrounded them on all sides. Mushroom Fiddler Leave 93, Elite. Skeletons overgrown by hyphae and sprinkled with mushroom caps released themselves from their moldy surroundings the moment they got close. It was impossible to see them, among the growths before they moved on their own. It was a horrifying, but mostly sad sight. Seeing the rotting skeletons used as frames, lifelessly moved by some parasitic fungi gave them a sense of desolation and despair. It had an even more tragic connotation than many kinds of undead. Another intrusive thought came over them. The spores in the air. If this was, what happens to anyone that was too weak to resist the infection? Maybe it would still happen to them later on? How horrible would be the feeling of having something like not just grow inside and kill you, but knowing that one skeleton would become a lifeless puppet for your killer to manipulate. Lixis, kill it with fire! Finn exclaimed, but the half-elf was already far ahead of her. Finn's call was swallowed by a roaring elemental fire snake that shot at the skeletons. The flame became even bigger, burning up the spores in the air. One of them was hit, and swallowed by the merciless flame, only leaving black bones behind. The other skeletons, however, managed to evade. As the snake with a basic consciousness pursued them, the enemies proved their terrifying agility, making them just more disturbing. Their awkward movements, in the beginning, were just a ruse. These bones covered in black hyphae and mushrooms agilely jumped and hid between the mushroom pillars, so fast that they had a hard time keeping track of their silhouettes in the twilight of the dungeon. Any night vision did not help too much, in the dim, complicated environment. It was not just that they did not adhere to movements that were in the range of human possibilities, but they immediately melded into the background when they sat on the coral-like mushroom reefs. Their brains had a hard time discerning their location, and even using observation skills did not work when they entered a kind of masked state. Even if you hide, it won't help you. Lixis exclaimed, and the flamed snake crashed into one of the reefs where a skeleton hid. However, nothing happened, except the mushrooms becoming slightly scorched. The elementalist was left stunned. We shouldn't underestimate this place. I doubt it's called the Abyss for no reason. Get serious and stay vigilant, Mike gave his instructions, and they took a tighter formation to defend against the quick bonies darting around them. Mike and Finn stayed with Bulko and Lixis, while Mina vanished into the shadows. Mike saw movement from the corner of his eye and fended off the bony claw with his sword, but the mushroom fiddler had already hidden again before he could do a counter-move. The impact he had felt on his weapon was more than enough to let the Catmen know that they could not underestimate these things. They could not underestimate these dungeons. This was just the first mob they met on the first floor. It was customary that they would be the weakest and most numerous beasts in the dungeon. He saw another flash of movement on Finn's side, but before the fairy made a move, the skeleton was cut apart by shadow blades that shot out from the ground. An assassin against assassins. With Mina's skill, it was no surprise that she could stalk and kill the fiddler in the dark. However, as the skeleton was cut apart by the shadow blades, the mushroom fiddler suddenly exploded in a cloud of spore that enveloped the whole party. They felt the shock wave, but it was accompanied by a rush of severe pain, coughing, and breathlessness as they all broke down in fits of coughing. Their coughing quickly turned into them vomiting blood and tiny mushrooms. Bulko had the strongest physique among them, but even he was surprised by how little the spores affected him. He quickly chugged a healing potion and started casting healing magic to help the other recover. Despite also coughing blood, Finn managed to activate her divine powers. A golden aura quickly covered her and expanded to protect the others. She was the chosen of Bess, the protector of homes, families, and children. They were her family, her home. Of course, the monster did not let go of the chance their suicide bomber had given them and attacked the incapacitated party. Without the fairy's quick action, they may have suffered heavy losses. Like this, the moment a mushroom fiddler got too close to the party, they were eradicated by knives of divine light, that shot from the aura enveloping the party members. Even if they tried to detonate, the divine light just swallowed them whole, the moment they were hit by one of the knives, not leaving a trace of the monsters. Under Bulko's and Finn's efforts, the party soon recovered. Koog, Finn, how long is this protection going to last? Mike asked when he finally got enough breath to speak. Not much longer. It also has a very long cooldown, so you better get ready and drink some more potions, she answered, wheezing herself. Ugh, that didn't work out at all. We have to change our strategy here, Lixus commented, between taking a gulp of an endurance potion. They had collected a few important pieces of information. The spores ignored their armors and the best way to resist them was high endurance, which was why all of them drank endurance potion, which could temporarily increase their attributes. The other was that fire was definitely effective against them. Overwhelming divine power, too. However, simple attacks that did not get rid of the corpse, or pure physical attacks seemed to only lead to the creature turning into spore bombs. Give me some buffs, I want to try some things, Mina said grimly and spat out a globule of blood. She was angry, mostly at herself since she had caused the current situation. Even when she knew that it was not necessarily her fault, as she could not know this would happen, she was dissatisfied. Mike observed her for a moment, before giving Bulko and Finn a nod, to stack their buffs on the shadow assassin. His sister gave him an appreciative nod, before vanishing in the shadows and leaving the area of protection. Seeing their comrades get eradicated when they got too close to the light, the mushroom fiddlers turned to observe the party from a safe distance. Or that was what they thought. Since they were currently not hiding, Mina was able to use this chance. In quick succession 3 of the creatures died without exploding or a trace of Mina being seen. One simply fell over dead, split in half. The second was swallowed by rapidly growing ice that encased the body before falling over and shattering. The last one suddenly started shaking violently, as the hyphae and mushrooms growing on the skeleton were suddenly eaten by a growing rot, that swallowed them and turned the mushrooms to dirt. Fire, ice, disease, and silence seemed to work against their suicide explosions, the Catwoman stated as she reappeared among the party. She had just tested the powers of the Shard of Biting Ice, Asclepius Needle, and the power of the Blessing of Sekhmet on the fungi enemies. Now they knew of several ways to suppress the spore explosion. Based on that they came up with some ways to counter the mushroom fiddlers before Finn's protection ran out. Good, let's go ahead and show them who they messed with. Chapter 769 7 Bridges and some more. Fire, light, and lightning arrows filled the darkness, as winged creatures resembling harpies with bat wings were shot out of the sky. Seth and Tatzel were standing on a precariously swaying suspension bridge made of brittle wood and rotten rope. They had stepped onto it the very moment they entered this dungeon. Except for the place they were standing on, everything around that was a pitch-black darkness. Of course, this didn't stop the two from seeing exactly what place they came to. High above them was a rock dome ceiling, filled with these creatures called Swift Twilight. Below them was a seemingly endless abyss and the bridge supposedly crossed it. It was a weird setting for the first floors. Every few steps the two would take on the bridge, some of the sleeping batwomen above would come down to attack them and the bridge. They had pondered about simply attacking the sleeping ones and taking out all of them at once, but after a quick test decided against it. The test was Tetzel trying to fly with magic. It didn't work. Similar to the gorge that split Mina's Mar from the entrance to the cavern it was built in, dungeons could define annoying stuff like no flight zones. If the bridge really broke, they would be forced to fall all the way down. Despite doubting that it would actually kill him, the blacksmith rather wouldn't take the fall, if it was avoidable. Instead, they simply decided to walk quickly and shoot down any attackers without stopping. This way they were constantly surrounded by readily available experience. Seeing how a Swift Twilight was a Level 93, elite, creature and was able to survive relatively long, even when hit by Seth's fire magic, the Imuji's lightning magic, or Apollo's light arrows that countered its inherent element of darkness, the blacksmith had to accept that the abyss was really a different level. Not enough to make him get serious, but definitely, something to take note of. He only hoped the others would be okay. Roughly halfway across the bridge, Tatzel's breathing started to become more labored. Let's take a break and replenish our energy, he said as he came to a standstill. I can still go on, the snakelet asserted bravely. I'm sorry, but not everyone is young like you. I really want to sit down for a moment. Let me take a break, okay? Come on, sit down beside me. Let's eat something. The blacksmith simply sat down in the middle of the bridge and persuaded the Imuji to sit with him and eat something. Tatzel hesitated for a moment but finally nodded gratefully and laid down beside Seth, coiling his body in a wide spiral around the both of them. Seth brought out some of the dishes Link cooked and the two filled their stomachs, sitting midair on a suspension bridge in the middle of a dungeon. The blacksmith also used the time to check on his status. Excitedly. He saw that he was already halfway up to level 92. Tatzel also proudly claimed that he had risen by 2 levels. With the risen difficulty, the experience gained had also increased by a lot thinking about how many mobs they killed, Seth guessed that the experience gained per monster was almost 5 times that of a Level 92, Elite, in a surface dungeon. Whether it was 5 times the strength though, he couldn't quite tell. How was he supposed to accurately gauge the difference in strength between two things that both died with a single attack? Sure, he could also make an effort and compare their attributes he could see with Aya's discerning eyes, but he didn't feel like bothering with that. They sat there for a while, and while they didn't move, they also were not attacked. The dungeon was relatively relaxing in that regard. Should we get back to work? Seth asked, seeing that Tatzel had mostly recovered his mana and stamina. Yes. Let's go. If this goes on, I might reach Level 90 by the time we meet the final boss, the Emuji bragged excitedly. Not a lot changed. They kept running and gunning across the bridge, leaving a heap of falling, burned corpses in their wake. The only change came when they reached the other side of the bridge. Stoic Twilight Level 94, mini-boss. When the other end finally came in sight, they suddenly saw a male version of the Swift Twilights taking a stance at the end of it. Was he some kind of floor boss? He didn't look weak. With a broad stance, he rammed his spear into the ground majestically, like he was guarding their escape route. Suddenly, he lifted his spear. You shall not, His majestic speech was rudely interrupted by an armored fist turning his face inside out. No, you don't. You are not even a wizard. Seth had kept Tatzel's speed up to now. Seeing the mini-boss trying to cut off their bridge, he shifted to a sprint and directly charged past the boss, hitting him squarely in the face. His teeth still in the air, the stoic Twilight hit the ground with a heavy thump. What did you think you were doing there, hey? Tatzel quickly hurried after him to get off the bridge, just in time to watch Seth stomp on the boss while it was still on the ground, making sure it stayed there. His shattering stomp crushed bones and stones as he kept cursing at the foe beneath. He had a little trauma about fall damage from the time he returned to Earth and got first-hand experience on how it felt to roll down a slope and fall down a cliff. Although he was not afraid to fall, he didn't take kindly to the threat of falling into a seemingly bottomless pit. Ding! You have leveled up. You are now Level 92. With the death of the boss under the heel of his boot, Seth finally gained another level. It even dropped a medium-sized rare soul for him. The blacksmith felt almost appeased by that. Having managed the mini-boss, he finally had time to check the stone ledge they had entered. Here, at the other end of the bridge was nothing much aside from the mini-boss and the door in the rock wall that had opened with the death of the boss. Is everything okay, Mom? Tatzel asked a little uncertain. Of course, of course. I'm sorry, did I scare you? It's just that he tried something really uncalled for, he said, touched that Tatzel actually cared for him. It's all right. I have seen much worse, with Big Mom, the Emuji said readily after Seth assured him he was okay. Should we rest a little, or should we go to the next floor or section right away? The bard asked the snake, after checking Tatzel's stats. The Emuji had also gained 2 levels with the sprint across the other half of the bridge and the kill on the boss. Most of his energies had already recovered. Seth still asked him, whether it was okay to continue. Yes. I want to see the next floor. This was so interesting, the snakelet cheered. Motivated, the 2 powerhouses entered the next section of the dungeon through the door. They were ready to ransack the whole place for everything it was worth. Abyss or not, they planned to waltz through anything that dared to stand in their way. Or hunt down what tried to stay out of their way. No experience would be spared, no corpse would go unlooted. Loot for the loot god. Junk for the pawn shop. Chapter 770 Aura of Combat. Ding! You have leveled up. You are now Level 92. The gasping party looked at the massive creature they had just felled. Phaenis tried her best to regain her breath, looking at the Level 95 Colossus they had just barely managed to kill. If Yule Cat's Fur or Seth were present, they may have suspected that this was the place the Maestro had gotten the materials for his Colossus creation. After ascending the staircase to the next floor, they had once again entered an expansive hallway, but this one was lined with doors. The rooms inside were in a much better state than the desolate ones below. With the intact giant furniture and forest-like carpets, also came the original inhabitants of this dungeons. Each room was home to one of these giant humanoids, that made even giants look like toddlers. They had battled the creature for a long time, but it was finally revealed, that even these giants had weaknesses. In the same way, a human could die from the bite of a tiny spider, they could also stack on the damage and slowly but surely take the giant's life. It was just like it had nothing going for it, except its size and physical prowess. Lydia and Archer had managed to blind the beast with their arrows. Afterward, it was up to the vanguard to fell it like a tree by focusing their attacks on the ankles. Azul and Jess used their magic in the meantime to distract and stun the blinded Colossus. Their fight revolved more around strategy and didn't involve any big or flashy attacks. MVP of the fight was ultimately Dohu, with his Ave of Polytechnos and the increased damage of cleaving attacks. He contributed the most in severing the creature's Achilles sinews and making it fall. With the meat mountain finally on the ground, they were able to calmly attack its head, being careful of the wildly flailing arms. They had taken almost 2 hours to fell the one in the first room. In exchange, they gained almost 10% of the experience to reach Level 92, which brought most of the over the threshold. The other reward for their kill was some colossal teeth and a colossal femur. They were sure Seth would have wanted one of the bodies, but since they were in a traditional dungeon, the bodies could only be looted, not taken with them. It was different from the Hive, which was not a complete dungeon. Phaenis had wanted to try and use the powers of Phobos on the creature, but they had decided to save divine powers for later. She accepted that. This was only the second floor, so they had to keep some aces up their sleeves in preparation for what may come next. Instead, she had relied on the power of Yatagan Mim. Taking the metaphorical role of the spider, Phaenis kept stinging the giant with the short sword that could change size and appearance. Stacking the sword's powers of poison and decay, the threat walker kept weakening the beast until it finally surrendered to their attacks. Although taking them down took a long time and was tiresome, it was very efficient if they took the amount of experience into account. They took their time to recover, before going to the next room. A spear burning with green flames and emitting black smoke stabbed through the incorporeal chest. As the flames licked along the body of air, the smoke filled it, like a drop of ink falling into water. The creature became more visible and much slower. It was clear that it was severely poisoned. Tekker's pipe and the sword of chains were similarly dipped in a chemical solution burning with green flames and emitting toxic smoke. The whole party had a jump in ability, as strengthened magic and attacks defended against the newly arrived enemy. The creatures that had managed to flee had come back with reinforcements, but these reinforcements faced unprecedented resistance. They met the party after Allison had enough time to thoroughly distribute her drugs among her party members, tremendously increasing the party's firepower. Especially the alchemical oils she gave the vanguard to cover their weapons and worked wonders, once Ray enchanted them with his tribal fire. Now the idyllic meadow was covered in heavy swathe of black smoke. The emissions of the burning oil had severe effects unless one had already taken an antidote. While beings with a physical body would feel confused, drowsy, and dizzy after short contact with the smoke and wouldn't die, it was especially effective on the creatures with bodies made of air. Even when they used storm and wind magic to attack the party and get rid of the smoke, the toxic cloud barely budged. With Allison's doping, made with the assistance of her legendary ring, the party suddenly had an advantage in attacks and battlefield over the area opponents, where they had been almost helpless before. The resilient elementals were still no easy opponent, but they finally had enough crowd control to stop them from simply running away or hiding their presence. When they ultimately finished off the group of almost 100 elite monsters that had surrounded them, they all had reached Level 92, too. Don't celebrate too early. Yes, we can fight them effectively now, but there was not even a mini-boss among these guys. This is still just the start of this place. They were all in high spirits, but Monique spoke up to caution them and dampen their spirits. They couldn't afford to loosen up. A dungeon was not the place to become negligent, they had to stay on edge. Her warning soon came true. This time they were not only surrounded by an even bigger crowd materializing from thin air, this time there were 2 mini-bosses and the floor boss among them. This time they were in a real pickle. Ray, I think it's time to try your idea. Monique mumbled. Sure, give me a few minutes to set everything up, the shaman said and brought out a few vials he had gotten from Allison. As a shaman, the caster's skill set was very varied. In combat, he usually took the role of support, as he had buffs to strengthen and heal his allies, while he could weaken the enemy with curses. But this wasn't all, he also had quite a few non-combat skills and he believed one of them could get in handy. Alright, we will buy you that time. Everyone, in formation. Monique shouted her instruction and used one of her skills as a chosen. The aura of combat was based on being the strategic leader of the group and allowed her to raise the power of all troops under her by 250% for the time they stayed in a specific formation on the battlefield. It was still the same setup, with Tekker taking the brunt of the damage and aggro, while Shay, Allison, Monique, and Jonah did their best to buy Ray the time he needed. The difference was that they were all covered in the silver halo of Athena's divine power. With the boost of her divine skill and the doping, the only problematic opponents were the boss and the two mini-bosses. I will take the boss, Monique announced. Leave the mini-boss to the left to me. Azul asserted, raising her palpitating spear. She was a lighting mage, but as the former leader of the Chimeras, she was also very confident in her melee combat. Then I will take the right one. Jonah acknowledged. I will protect Ray. Shay called out motivated. He was a mage of water and ice, but the weapon he wielded was the Tauren Trident of the Deep. Since his magic had little effect on the airheads, he had also rubbed the toxic oil on the trident, to fight the elementals. Allison and Ray were the only pure casters of the group, albeit Allison's Stormcaller still packed quite a punch when used as a club. Tekker, take good care of those three, Monique said, deflating Shay's enthusiasm, before throwing herself into battle with the boss.